Before Rambler, there was Thomas Buckland Jeffery, born the 5th of February, 1845, Devon, England, to Thomas Hellyer Jeffery and Elizabeth Buckland Jeffery. Little is known about Thomas Jeffery's early life, but he did have one sibling who was born 5 years later in 1850, named Edwin James Jeffery. Just for reference, we are going to be on a first-name basis with a lot of the characters in this story because it will get a bit confusing because the company is named after Thomas B Jeffery's. Thomas had a job making mathematical tools at the age of 16. In 1863, at the age of 18, Thomas would immigrate to the United States and would make his way to Chicago, where he would reside. Richard Philip Gormully was also born in Devonshire, England, on February 24th of 1847. Very little is known about Richard's early childhood, but he did immigrate to the United States in 1868 and would settle in Chicago, working in various manufacturing businesses before getting into bicycle manufacturing. History is unclear on when Richard Philip Gormully met Thomas B. Jeffries, but together they would form Gormully and Jeffries Manufacturing Company, founded in Chicago in 1879. The company started building children's bicycles, and then they would evolve into other types of bicycles. And just like everyone else that gets into business, Gormully and Jeffries, they started off small, but they kept at it. And in no time at all, their small bicycle business with a single retail showroom on 85 Madison Street grew, blossomed into a full-blown bicycle empire with branches in major cities like New York, Boston, and Washington, D.C. Fun fact, Gormully and Jeffries Manufacturing Company was the second largest bicycle company in the United States. I was going to say in the world, but probably not the world. Which one was the first in the comment section below? In 1887, Gormully and Jeffries would begin to market their bikes under a new brand, Rambler, offering a range of bicycle models, different designs, and different features, both in women's, men's, boys, and girls. Something to point out about Thomas, he was an innovator, an inventor, and he was always looking for ways to improve his product or to just make life a little bit easier. Back in the day, Dunlop pneumatic tires were used on bicycles, and they were okay in the same way that a Yugo is okay as a car for transportation. The Dunlop tires were primitive, to say the least. They started off as garden hoses, essentially, but in tubular form. They were secured to the rim by glue and air pressure, pressing them against the rim. Rims were generally made of wood and with a concave surface to receive the tube. It wasn't foolproof, though, and a lot of times the tires would come off the rims. But it's really important to note that because the tires were glued, they were really hard to service. Thomas, seeing this as a major problem that could be improved upon, would invent an all-new tire called clincher tires, which he patented in 1882. And it's also important to note that Thomas B. Jeffries made a bunch of different wheel designs, not just the clincher tire. There was other ones leading up to the clincher tire. Some of them worked great, some of them didn't work so great. The clincher tire worked so well that they're still being used on bikes today. The tire was held to the rim by wire that was embedded into the rubber of the tire. 2 wires are embedded on either side of the tire. The wires fit inside edges of the rim to hold the tire in place when air is pumped in. The wire could also be tightened onto the rim. Thomas B. Jeffries' design was genesis for this style of tire. Life is all about timing and trends. The bicycle was a trend in the late 1890s. Thomas knew that it was only a matter of time before something would come along and take the bicycle's place. A new trend would appear on the horizon, the horseless carriage. In 1895, Thomas and his son Charles, who was a man after Thomas's own heart, would go to the first ever in the United States horseless carriage race. That's where both Thomas and Charles Jeffery would witness an internal combustion engine and horseless carriage for the very first time. Could you even imagine what that would be like? Hearing the sound that the engine makes, the smells of gasoline vapors coming from the carburetor, the oil smells, and the fact that it is moving without a horse. It would be a lot to take in at one time. J. Frank Duryea would win the race in a Duryea car. The race was a 52-mile race. Average speed of the Duryea was 5.05 miles per hour. Both Thomas and Charles were floored by this new concept and could not wait to get home to build a design of their very own. Knowing that that was going to be what replaces the bicycle, it was the future. Thomas B. Jeffery would have his working prototype by 1897, sourcing a lot of parts from the bicycle business. After witnessing his father's creation with the horseless carriage that he produced, it inspired Charles to build his own creation. Charles' design was a runabout, and it was way more advanced than Thomas B. Jeffery's design. The pair, Thomas B. and Charles, were so proud of it that they decided to put it on display at the New York Auto Show. Charles would build 2 additional prototypes that were more sophisticated than Thomas's design. The pair would show all of the prototypes at the New York Auto Show in the year 1900. The auto show cars didn't have any plaques associating what name was to be given to these cars. The public was confused on whether it was a Gormully and Jeffries product or if it was a Rambler product. The car would take the name Rambler. Rambler featured some pretty radical ideas for the time, like an engine mounted in the front under a hood and left-hand drive. The public loved the car so much, there was people asking, how do I buy one of those cars? But up until this point, there wasn't any real plan to make automobiles for the masses. This was just a proof of concept, essentially. Tragedy would strike on August 29th in Montreal, Quebec. Thomas B. Jeffery's business partner, Richard Philip Gormully, would die suddenly. Taking this as a sign from a higher power, Thomas B. Jeffery would sell all of his shares in the company to American Bicycle Company, which was a huge bicycle manufacturer empire headed by Colonel Albert Pope, who was born in 1843. The guy was a Civil War hero, rising to the ranks of lieutenant colonel. Getting into the bicycle business around 1876, he would first sell imported bikes from companies like Excelsior with the Excelsior Duplex, Bayliss, Thomas and Company of Coventry, England. Pope would make his own bicycles eventually. Under the brand name Columbia, Pope's dream was to monopolize the bicycle manufacturing business here in the US. And he was on his way because he owned a lot of the patents for various bike designs, charging royalties for anyone that wanted to produce those bike designs. Pope Manufacturing was in business from 1876 until 1918. When Thomas B. Jeffery sold out to Pope, they were the largest bicycle company in the United States at that period in time. Thomas B. Jeffery would, however, retain the naming rights for his favorite name, the Rambler. Thomas B. Jeffery would build an empire which would rise from the ashes of Sterling Bike Manufacturing Company. Thomas would convert the factory from building bikes to building automobiles, and this company was located in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Jeffery's cars had innovations not yet realized by other automobile manufacturers, like the use of a steering wheel. Jeffery's cars were quality built at reasonable prices, which was reflected in the sales. From 1902 through 1908, the Jeffery Company would build bigger and more reliable cars with each passing year. Their first model would be produced in 1901. It was the Rambler Model A. The Model A was designed by Thomas's son, Charles. The car wasn't for sale for the public until 1902. Ramblers would be the second car built in the United States on an assembly line. Oldsmobile was the first. Henry Ford kind of gets false credit for being the first. Henry Ford perfected the assembly line, but wasn't the first, nor did he invent the concept. 1902 was the first year that Ramblers, the car, was sold to the public. The 1902 Rambler was powered by a single 95 cubic inch displacement that produced 4 horsepower. The engine was horizontally mounted, mated to a 2-speed transmission, priced around $750, which would be equivalent to you spending $27,889.45 in the year 2025. It was right-hand drive and used a tiller to steer. Evidently, they came up with a steering wheel concept, saw that everybody and their mom was doing the tiller, went back to the tiller, then went back to the steering wheel. It's weird, but trends dictate the market, just like now. It's also important to note that Thomas B Jeffery's company also offered another model called the Model B Stanhope for $825, which would be equivalent to you spending $30,678.39 in the year 2025. In June of that same year, Rambler set the pace in a speed test at Minnehaha, Minnesota. The Rambler set a record of 3 miles in 7 minutes, 8 seconds. And that doesn't sound like it was all that impressive, but you have to understand that this wasn't your typical race. This race featured a 35% incline. This publicity stunt, along with Rambler, would do a New York to Boston reliability run from October 9th through the 15th. Automobile manufacturers back in the day would do these events for free advertisement to promote the durability of their vehicles. These 2 stunts would help out Rambler drastically in the sales department. Rambler would sell 1,500 units, making it second in the automotive industry, second only to Oldsmobile, and also, without even realizing it, Jeffery's company hit the impossible milestone of being successful instantaneously. Here is a customer testimonial about the car from back in the day. It is truly a wonderful piece of mechanism. It starts immediately, runs like a jackrabbit, and stops only at will. The Jefferys would make improvements to the Rambler, going to a twin cylinder in 1904. They also offered the single cylinder in 1904. Rambler car body styles also increased with each passing year. 1905 was a huge year for Rambler, or the Thomas B Jeffery's company, I should say, because they saw spare wheels and tires being mounted to the cars. Also, this is the big news, the Kenosha factory expanded to a 15-acre complex with 33.5 acres available for if they ever wanted to expand. 1905 was also the last year, I should say, for the Rambler single. It would be discontinued for the 1906 model year. The company would move their cars more upmarket, powered by the twin-cylinder engine, priced between $1,200 to $3,000. But despite moving upmarket, sales would increase to 3,807 cars. A 4-cylinder would join the lineup in 1906. Also in 1906, they hired this marketing slogan dude who came up with slogans such as "the right car for the right price" and "June time is Rambler time." The slogans were all coined by Edward S. Jordan. Yes, that Edward Ned Jordan. Edward would rise through the ranks at the Thomas B Jeffery's company, becoming secretary and then general manager before leaving and forming Jordan Motor Car Company, which was founded in 1916 in Cleveland, Ohio. They would build assembled cars from 1916 through 1919. The company would have to regroup in 1919, but they would last until 1931, being another casualty of the Great Depression. But he really did have a way with words. On April 2nd, 1910, tragedy would strike the Thomas B Jeffery's family. Thomas B Jefferys would take a trip to Pompeii, Italy, where he would suffer a massive heart attack that would take his life. Charles Jeffries would take the helm at the Thomas B Jeffery's company. The U.S. Army was looking to replace their 4-mule teams. The Army wanted a truck that could be as nimble and go anywhere the mules could go. Proposals would open late 1912. Thomas B Jeffery's company would answer the call Thomas would purchase a four-wheel drive auto company truck to reverse engineer and try to build their own version. The company was founded as the Badger four-wheel drive auto company in Clintonsville, Wisconsin. They built their first four-wheel drive vehicle in 1908. It was called the Battleship. The Jefferies company would ultimately sell the truck because they couldn't figure out how to re-engineer it. Jefferies company would just build their own design from the ground up. The Jefferies design would be a workhorse for the U.S. Army, known as the Jeffery Quad, but the original name was to be Rambler Quadruple. The original plan for the power plant was to use the 281.4 cubic inch displacement inline 4, which was good for 21 horsepower. The same engine was used in the Rambler cars during that time. Jeffery would make the switch to a Buddha unit, a 312 cubic inch displacement inline 4 that produced double the horsepower at 52 horsepower, 1800 RPM. The Quad was produced from 1913 through 1928. It drives, steers, and brakes on all four wheels. Yes, you heard that right. This thing has four-wheel drive. It's technically all-wheel drive because it doesn't really have a differential. Four-wheel steer and brakes on all four wheels. In 1913, it's important to note that the Jeffery Quad is not the first four-wheel drive vehicle. The first was built in France in 1898. Spiker was another early company to introduce four-wheel drive, and they also had four-wheel steer. Even though the Jeffery Quad wasn't the first to introduce four-wheel drive, it's still recognized as the first mass-produced four-wheel drive truck. The Jeffery Quad would find success in the U.S. Army. The truck would also find use abroad in countries such as France and Russia. In 1914, Charles Jeffries wanted to pay homage to his father. To the end that his name remain in the memories of men, we have named the new car Jeffery. Changing the name from Rambler to Jeffery took a lot of guts considering the success of the Rambler brand. Rambler stood for quality, but despite the name change, Jeffery turned out to be an even more popular model. The new car sported a monoblock four-cylinder that produced 40 horsepower. The car rode a 118-inch wheelbase. They also offered a longer 128-inch wheelbase chassis with a 48 horsepower 6. In 1914, Jefferies' production was up to 10,417 cars and 3,096 quads. Tragedy would strike the world on June 28th of 1914 when Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated, which was the spark that ignited the powder keg, so to speak, catapulting the world into the Great War. The war was between the Central Powers, which was the German Empire, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria, versus the Allied Powers, France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, and eventually the United States. Charles was traveling to France on the Lusitania to discuss a contract for the sale of an armored car the Jefferies company was producing alongside the Jeffery Quad. The armored car took the Jeffery Quad and added artillery to it, as well as armored plating, Hotchkiss machine gun. There was many different versions built, but the armored cars were being produced as early as 1915. While traveling on the Lusitania, Charles became acquainted with Thomas Silva, who was in the cotton business. Thomas and Charles became fast friends. The Lusitania, for those that don't know, was the largest ocean liner in the world when it was launched in 1906 by the Cunard Line. Mauretania, a sister ship, would take the title in 1907 for the largest ocean liner. In 1915, Germany would declare the seas a war zone. Germany had a weapon that no other country had, the U-boat, or aka submarine, which were wreaking havoc on ships above. No ship was safe. On May 7th of 1915, Lusitania was just finishing up its 222nd crossing of the Atlantic, coming from New York heading towards England. Below the water, a U-boat saw a huge target and shot one torpedo towards the object. The torpedo would hit the Lusitania, ripping through the hull on the starboard side, just past the bridge. It only took about 18 minutes from when the torpedo hit to sink the Lusitania. Of the 1,960 passengers and crew on board, 1,197 of those souls lost their lives in the freezing cold water, waiting for what was next, rescue or possibly death. Charles began to think of how his father worked his whole entire life, and he never really got to enjoy just living life. Charles Jeffery would also find out that his friend Thomas Silva, who was younger than him, they're the fast friends that they would meet up in the smoking room, he did not make it. He did not survive the Lusitania disaster. So at the age of 40, Charles Jeffery decided it was time to get out of the automotive business and live his best life. Charles Jeffery would sell the Thomas B Jeffery's company to Charles Nash, who, after losing his position as president of General Motors to William Durant through shady business dealings, which reinserted William Durant back as president of General Motors, Charlie Nash vowed to never work for anybody like that again. Charlie would team up with Walter P. Chrysler to try to take over Packard, because it turns out building a car company from the ground up is expensive and it takes a lot of time. Taking over a company with a great brand recognition was the way to go. Packard's board of directors wasn't having any of it, though. Walter P. would get a job running Maxwell Motor Company, which was founded in 1904 by Jonathan Dixon Maxwell and Benjamin Biscoe. Walter P. would take over the company, and Chrysler would evolve from the Maxwell Motor Car Company. Anyway, Charles Jeffery would sell the company, the factory, and the rights to the Rambler name to Charlie Nash. Charles Jeffery was 40 years old when he decided to get out of the automotive business to live his best life. He would go on until 1935, when he would die at the age of 59. Charlie Nash would finish out the 1916 model years of Jeffery before changing the name to Nash. Nash would also build the Jeffery Quad, now called the Nash Quad. And there's a lot more to this story, but as they say, that's another story for another time. And Charlie Nash is going to be the next main character. It's going to be the next company history that we go into. So this is kind of like a part 2 series. So look for that towards the end of the month. All right, now it's time for Would You Rather. 2 scenarios today. In the first scenario, would you rather have a 1902 Rambler runabout, or 1904 Rambler, or 1906 Rambler? I'm going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. On to the second scenario. 1914 Jeffery Quad, or 1915 Jeffery, or 1913 Rambler. Once again, going to leave this here for a minute. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. Now it's time for Name That Tune. First person to get both the name of the band and the song title correctly in the comment section will have their comment pinned to the top of it. Thank you all so much for coming out and watching this one. If you'd like to get in touch with me, shoot me a comment in the comment section below, or you could always send me an email at what_its_like@yahoo.com. Thanks again for everything that you guys bring in the comment section, and until next time, toodaloo!